Excuse me, there we go. Welcome to Let's Talk Leadership. I'm going to be your host and your advisor today. And today, I'm not going to explain a lot about what we're doing on this podcast. That's on several other podcasts. What we're going to delve into today is difficult communication. And I've kind of chosen this as a topic for you to ask leadership questions about because it's so prevalent in what we're doing today. It's amazing how much we're engaged with this problem. And it's also amazing to me that we virtually spend no time educating people about communication and particularly interpersonal communication, which leaves a vast majority of the population at a disadvantage when it comes to communicating. So, I'm going to try to cover a little bit about the complexity of difficult conversations. It's not going to give you all the answers you want to hear. For that, you need to learn a lot more, and I'll explain how you can do that towards the end of the conversation. But if you're on here, I should be live streaming on YouTube. It showed that I was up and running on that, and it showed that I was up and running as I'm looking at right now here, LinkedIn. So if you want to join me, you're certainly welcome to do that. But if you don't, for some reason, you're going to be watching this what I call an asynchronous environment, which doesn't allow you necessarily to ask the question to help clarify what I'm going to present to you in a deeper, more meaningful way. But that seems to be the choice that people are using today. They either can't join me or they're choosing simply to watch the video at their convenience. But you lose a little bit of that when you don't have that direct interaction with me. And that's on chat. And of course, it would be much better if you would hop on air with me so we could talk to each other face to face. So if you ever want to do that in the future on one of these sessions, there's plenty of ways to reach me in the descriptions of this video. I'm going to be putting some information in the description of this, pointing you towards more things you need to learn about interpersonal communication in order for you to cope with difficult conversations. Now, this doesn't have to be aimed at leaders. This can be aimed at anyone who has difficult conversations to deal with. That's employees, or it could actually be on a personal level. So let's delve into what I'd like you to first understand, and that is what interpersonal communication is about. It's really a means whereby one or more people, actually, if two or more people, you need at least two people to have interpersonal communication. And when you have that scenario, really what you're doing is you're using communication to express your thoughts, your feelings, and your emotions to others. And so, how you do that and the complexity that's involved in doing that is not very well understood by most people. We just assume because we can listen and talk that we're communicating. It's not the case most of the time for most people, to be honest with you. And a result of that are conflicts and difficulties and misunderstanding and disinformation and even propaganda at points uh, get involved in interpersonal communication when we have a misunderstanding. So, what you need to understand is interpersonal communication is absolutely essential in creating what we call communities. Now, most people don't live in total isolation. I mean, I guess there may be some out there somewhere. I think monks try to do that, but even they try to do that in a community as opposed to just simply themselves, isolated somewhere with no contact in whatsoever in any way with any other human being. I guess that's possible, but I'm guessing that is an infinitesimal amount of people. There is virtually non existent in the world. Nearly everybody lives in some other environment where they're connected or have to be connected to someone else. So I have an axiom about that. When there's more than one person involved, everything begins and ends with interpersonal communication. So what we're talking about is how do you connect and how do you build relationships and how do you survive and even thrive in a community environment, which we all basically belong to at some point. If you're in a family, that's a community. If you're in a church, that's a community. If you're at work, that's a community. If you belong to the United States of America versus Great Britain, that's a community. So we all belong to these communities, and frankly, I don't know any communities that people belong to that I can think of. Excuse me, allergies are going to be tough for me today. I live in Yukon, Oklahoma, and there's no trees or anything that stop the allergies from blowing in the air on a beautiful day. It's a beautiful day here. No tornadoes or anything around, so that's really a good day this time of the year. But anyway, back to communities. We live in a community, and normally in communities, they're structured, and they're structured by those who tend to follow and those who tend to lead. And I find that true in just about every environment. If you're in church, you're looking at your pastor as the leader. If you're in business, you're looking at bosses and managers and directors and vice presidents and CEOs as leaders. If you're in a family, even though there's equality, usually someone is leading in some aspects, even if you share that equally, so to speak. One of you has a better or stronger skill set than the other. At certain times, you take the lead. And in some cases where groups of people who don't even know each other somehow congregate for whatever reason, maybe you get stuck in an airport or something like that, and you're around a bunch of people you don't know, and there's a situation going on where you're trying to find flights and stuff. Normally, somebody steps up who has some sort of expertise or whatever, and people turn to that person, maybe as the source or the leader. So, so understand that's the premise of how we survive as humans in our current existence. Normally, it's in community. Normally, there are leaders within that community, and normally, there are followers. And how we connect with each other has to do with how well we communicate with each other. Now, like I said, since you were 2 years old, you've been talking and listening. And so if you're my age, that's well over 77 years. Okay. I've been talking and listening. So I'm pretty good at that. I'm pretty good at communicating because I have 8 years of upper division education in how to communicate. That is my major. That is where all my college education, my master's, and some of the work that I did on my doctoral program before I had to leave because of travel and family and those kinds of things. And then when it was time to go back, I really didn't need it. So it was kind of a waste of money to finish it out. Uh, but I have that kind of information, plus all the 45 years that I was a leader and or I developed leaders within organizations, and I changed or full large billion-dollar corporation cultures. So during that time, I've had oh, I don't know, probably I've touched tens of thousands of employees, and I have dealt with difficult, complex issues in environments that range from a boss and a subordinate trying to resolve a problem that they have with each other, up to and including um, massive lawsuits against whole corporations, where all of the employees get together and sue the corporation, where unions have tried to organize corporations and were involved in those issues and trying to resolve why that was. Why were employees trying to organize unions? And so that the leadership might understand why. Differences of opinions, difficult discussions, all of those, ranging from just disagreements about how you're treated, all the way up to sexual harassment, significant lawsuits where I've investigated for weeks and months and went through more legal depositions than I can even count over those years. So I've had a lot of experience at coping with difficult situations that were, could be solved with just a few understandings, all the way up to massive financial consequences to the difficult discussion. So I'm going to explain to you some of the things I've learned from all of that that is important for you to understand if you're going to find yourself in a difficult situation, trying to have a communication or interaction with somebody that's extremely difficult to handle. Now, uh, I have two books, I think, that are involved somewhere in this area. I think if you go over to, let's see if I've got um, a situation where I might be able to show those to you. Uh, I don't know. I don't think I have it on this particular setup. Uh, well, here I do. Yeah. I have something that I use where people can help me and give to me if they want to contribute as we keep things going. And so uh, this is called Buy Me a Coffee. If you take your phone and you put it on photo and you hold it up to that QR code, it'll take you to the website. And on there are two books on there. One is uh, about effective interpersonal communication and how it can help small businesses improve drastically. Um, and the other one is actually dealing with a course that I conduct on just this topic. So some of what you're getting here is part of that course that I teach. So you're getting some free educational stuff on this course. And it's called Interpersonal Communication Leadership Course. It is a 12-week course, one night a week for 2 hours a night or 24 hours of instruction. And it is like taking a master's degree seminar for a semester in interpersonal communication. And that's a fairly hefty price tag on it. It's $799 per person to take this course, and I only allow 6 people in the course at a time. And so, as you imagine, I can only do 2 or 3 courses a year because they last 12 weeks during the course. So that's like 3 months basically. So I can maybe get 4 courses in, or I can do a couple of courses a month for that 3 months, two different courses. But uh, Yeah, if you go there and look at there are some, the workbook for that course is there. When I started to do the course, it was just going to be a standard webinar kind of course, and it turned into be this dynamic 12-week program of highly interactive education and dialogue with 6 people on an ongoing basis that work as a team with me, and together we go through what is so important for leaders to understand about interpersonal communication. It's one of the things out of the tens of thousands of employees I've assessed. I asked basically 3 questions, but one of those 3 questions is, what would you like to see your leader do better after we've run some assessment? And this is a validation of the assessment data. I asked some question that question during that validation phase, and out of all of the tens of thousands of employees I assess, by far the most often stated answer is communication. I need my leader to communicate more effectively. And when I ask them, well, what do you mean by communication? They can literally tell me the things that they want to have happen, which are the behaviors that they observe are not happening with their leaders, and like frequency of interaction and how they interact and those kinds of things. And so that boils down to what we call interpersonal communication, the lack of knowledge about what happens when 2 people talk to each other and what's going on in that system. So, what you need to understand about difficult communication, if you, I'll show you a video here in a few minutes that goes through a brief explanation. I call it a communication primer. It's about 4 minutes long. I'll put it towards the end of this session. Uh, and what happens here is it explains the communication model. And so you can understand everything that's going on and where things like active listening and feedback fit into that total communication model. A lot of courses are taught on active listening, a lot of courses are taught on feedback separate, but they don't teach it in conjunction with everything else that's happening in the communication system. And it is a system. So, one of the things you need to know is your belief system, your culture, how you think about things. So, within this interpersonal communication leadership course, I teach a model. I spend some time and I go over how we evolve our culture. What does the culture consist of? What is that all about? And just briefly, in a nutshell, uh, not near what you need to know, but at least to give you an understanding. Your belief system is premised on your core values first. Those are the things your influencers in your life most readily established with you all through your life. Somewhere, these core values, and you don't have a lot of these core values. You may have 5 or 6 of them. Things like hate or love, or it could be religion, or it could be racism. These are core values that you simply, in other words, this is how I believe, and you virtually almost have to. Uh, you hardly ever change your mind about these core values. It can happen, but it's so difficult to get people to change their core values. And then, if you think of this like a centrifugal circle, as you move towards the outside from the core center towards the outside of the circle, you have different layers where other kinds of values are formed. And for example, it may be how you're influenced about dress, and that may change depending on the year, your age, a bunch of other things, but your influence, that's a value. Those constitute what we call your belief system. This is your belief system, And it consists of your core values and some other values that you've been influenced into believing are important, and you making a decision about how you want to believe in things and how you live your life. That belief system creates your expectations. And these are expectations because you have these belief systems. You kind of expect other people to want to believe the way you do. If we're going to be a community, I kind of want you to feel like I feel, or we're always at conflict. And so it's that need to convince you that what I believe and my expectations of you is to believe the same thing. I am trying to persuade you. And we spend most of our communication in that mode in some way, in some facet. Okay. It's about persuasion, it's about influencing other people. Now, how you do that is an interesting dynamic. It is the thing that trips up leaders most of the time and trips up people who have a difficult time in marriages. And sometimes it causes discontent in the work environment and those areas. So we have these belief systems, these core values, and they play a big role, and they kind of determine what we consider our morals, you know, and what our ethics. And so we assign a value to those morals and ethics. The values, whatever my belief system is creating for me, those values and those morals are correct. And people who don't agree with those are at odds with me. We are in conflict with each other, just so to speak. So, whether your morals and ethics are correct or not correct really often becomes uh, dependent upon your viewpoint. Okay. So, the only thing that may moderate that is what we call the majority. If you're out of sync with the majority of people who you're around and all of the communities that you interface with, all the way from your family to your marriage to your church to your clubs and associations to your local community to your county to your state to your government, whatever the majority seems to believe is the way we need to behave and believe, those are the things that become important. Those are the right ethics and the right morals. However, if we differ from those for whatever reason, then we tend to be judgmental and we establish boundaries to protect ourselves from those people who don't think or see things or have the viewpoint that we have. And that becomes a barrier to interpersonal communication. And it's something we're not understanding as we find ourselves coping with a lot of complexity and communication on our societies today. So that point of view plays an extremely important point or part in communicating with others, connecting. Remember, I can yell, I can scream, I can threaten, I can do a lot of things to try to get you to believe the way I do. But I have virtually no control over whether you really do or not. You can stare me dead in the eyes, and people often do, and look at you after you're red in the face and you talk for 30 minutes about why they need to believe this, and they look at you and they go, thanks, I appreciate what you said. They turn around and you walk away and they just disregard everything you had to say. But you don't know that because you have no way of reading their mind. You can only recognize that you failed to communicate with them when their behavior hasn't changed or hasn't modified. And then how to recognize that and make sure that that was because you didn't communicate, or maybe something else came into their life and had a different perspective they liked and they decided to go that way. You don't know that unless you continue the communication, unless there's an ongoing looping process where you talk about things and you talk them through until you come to an understanding, which requires a lot of patience. It requires a lot of active listening and a lot of feedback and a lot of sensitivity and empathy to other people, which we don't often have. We're not there. There are some people who, we keep saying a big thing today in leadership is empathy. Some people just don't know how to show empathy. They can't even have empathy for themselves. So having sympathy for somebody else is just out of the question. So that's a communication issue. It's a communication. You've got to understand how to connect and build trust with other people before you can get them to hear you in a manner that aligns with what you want to hear them say. Which brings me to a second axiom that I teach about communication. Axioms are things that are non negotiable, by the way. They are, in fact, that's it. This is what you need to believe, and there's no argument to it. Uh, the second axiom that I have is the meaning of the message that you send to another person, the meaning of that message always resides in the mind of that person. You can be very clear about what you believe you want that person to understand. In the end, it's up to that person to determine what you mean from what you said. And there are a lot of things that get in the way of that in an everyday communication process that people don't take the time to understand and think about. So let me take this thing down here. There we go. Uh, you should really check that out. I think that one communication, that interpersonal communication book, and actually the workbook. These are things that are almost like checklists that I use when I go in and assess people. I realize communication is faltering. I, I don't want to start teaching empathy or any other team building processes or any other thing about leadership until I can make sure the interpersonal communication problems are resolved first. Then I can go teach leadership skill sets. I can start working on that side of it. So that's how important. That's such a base level that's so important in leadership that people just don't understand. They've never been told about this. They've never been exposed to it. You don't get it in high school. There are college people who graduate with bachelor's, master's, and doctorates I worked with for years and years who had no idea how to communicate effectively. Um, and so that was important. So the question becomes when you're talking about dealing with difficult communications, you need to understand some of the dynamics of what's involved with communication. And the first thing you need to understand is what is the type of difficulty you have? What is the complex what is the complex problem you're dealing with? What is it that you're struggling with? And I find that normally falls. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. Okay, and the first thing you have to do is find out what really is at the root. of the conflict or whatever your difficult discussion is. What is the basis underpinning that? And those normally fall in, I found, into three major categories that you need to define first before you go deeper. And one of those is personal. And so personal categories are things like they could be family related. They could be marriage, core values, finances. These are things that people get at odds with each other about a lot. Child raising, education, divorce, uh, different, in-laws, just things that tend to happen between individuals and people. They're personal things that go on. They're usually at a smaller level. And then you have other categories of complex, difficult situations. It expands a little bit. And those are more like work related environments or what I call organizational complexity in terms of difficult issues. And those things are like leadership, where leaders are and employees are at odds with each other, or maybe departments are at odds with each other, or maybe you have a job performance issue that you're struggling with, or maybe there's job satisfaction. Could be actually some things as difficult and tough to handle as employment abuse or legal issues that fall under the employee relations realm, which is sexual harassment or racism or wage and hour or discrimination of some sort out there. These take hours and hours of collecting information and data to get to the root issue. If you happen to be doing this in a department, that's one thing. If it's a predominant issue in a region or an area, you could be dealing with hundreds, if not thousands, of employees and trying to collect the data and see where the issues are. So you begin to see when I talk about complexity, there's some dynamics here, and we'll cover those in a second. Then the third category is more the cultural value driven range, which is things like politics, such as conservative versus liberal, or Democrat versus Republican, or fascism versus democracy, or racism, or financial inequities, or should we be a society that regulates everything, or should we have more freedom to do whatever we choose without regulation? And what happens when you allow that freedom to transpire versus regulation? What happens if you overregulate? Okay, and of course the big one today that's really so much on everybody's mind is justice. What is justice? My gosh, talk about a complex, difficult scenario we're dealing with, and people just are, they're bouncing off the walls, and nobody's kind of taking time to come down and begin to take stock of how to deal with those complex issues. So, and then if you think about these, so uh, let's take these and put them into. Let me take a thing here and see if I can pull these up. Hold on one second here. Uh, okay, here we go. I have to come in here. So. difficult communication complexity. To give you an understanding of why people get so frustrated, why it seems so difficult and hard, I kind of want to guide you through this thought process. Okay. And I kind of think about it when I'm dealing with it, just to kind of organize my mind and my thought process about how to begin to approach how I want to deal with these things. Uh, they tend to happen on what I call a micro or a macro scenario, and then maybe the moderate uh, scenarios of complex communication issues. The micros have a lot to do with those personal communication things I talked about. They normally involve less people, and maybe down to just two people, depending on who you are and what you're doing. If it's just a family situation, it's between you and your spouse or your significant other or your boyfriend, girlfriend relationship. So those are more micro, complex issues. You can get to an understanding faster of all of the facets that are impacting the disagreements or the conflicts and begin to calm the situation down where people can then start focusing on issues and not each other. But then if you move to the moderate phase, then you're into the organizational world. And in some cases, for example, as a leader in the middle of an organization, you really only have control of that department that you're accountable for. But this happens to be a whole organizational wide problem, and you may not have the authority or the ability to control much of what's transpiring, but it is having significant conflict in terms of uh, your engagement and connection with your workforce, and or maybe connections with other elements of the organization as a whole. So that problem gets much more difficult to deal with than that micro level where you just have a couple of people involved. Now we're maybe talking about dozens or maybe even hundreds of people involved in a situation, and you're trying to get to the root causes of these complex, difficult situations so that you can begin to take a path that resolves them in a manner that helps everybody come out of the situation. And then we go to that macro level. So now let's take that, let's elevate that to countries like the United States of America, where we have a divide between those who are supporting democracy and others who support what are clearly and definitively defined as fascism. Now, whether you like one or the other, right now I want you to put that aside and recognize that both of them have their points of view. Remember, I told you, point of view becomes important for you to understand. If you cannot grasp the point of view, you even if you disagree with it, you have to understand it in order to be able to intelligently communicate with other people in a manner that makes you influential with them. You can't ignore them. You can't say they're just outright wrong, because the response to that is no, you're out wrong. And what you have is the next part of this is you're moving people from a balanced scenario where we're trying to understand something about all both points of view and try to find the commonalities that can balance us out. When you can't do that, when you stop, when you say just your point of view is the point of view that's right, you push people over to those radical sides. Those radical sides. And what's going on there is Now you have people who are becoming more and more entrenched and more isolated and less desirous to interact with others to try to find a balanced point of view, something that considers what's important to both sides. And that's what's going on in our country right now. And I can tell you that I experienced that personally. When you think about what we call the MAGA group out there, they call them the radical right or the MAGA group, and we have tagged them with their viewpoint being fascist. And because those of us who don't believe in some of the things that they're saying we need to do, we're assuming we're assuming because we're not connecting and we're not getting through, we're not effectively communicating with folks to truly understand their viewpoint in terms of what their pain points are. What is it about this viewpoint that has you so entrenched that that's the right thing to do? And we don't want to take the time to hear that because it's so offensive to us. The idea that we have to have total control of the government to rebalance it so that everybody benefits from the government. Okay? So we have a radical right group that's saying, I can live with somebody who is convicted of 34 criminal counts, felony accounts. I can live with them because those are financial kinds of things. And what that person is telling us is they're being a victim and they need to, in fact, have total control in order to gain control and then give back the freedom that you want in a way that's so much better than what we're looking at now. That's what, when I sit down and I talk with MAGA people and I simply am trying to say, help convince me, help me understand what you're thinking. Why do you think this way? I'm not saying what you're wrong. I just really need to understand it. And when I take that approach and they're talking to me, that's kind of what they're saying. They're saying we are been so screwed up and things seem to be wrong for the average person out here for so long, and they don't have they don't feel comfortable blaming the businesses or organizations are working for that problem because that's who pay their salaries. So they can't do that with them. So who's the other person we can look at? The government. The government isn't helping us correct any of this stuff. So it must be something wrong with the government. And so we must have to get control of that and really lock it down tight so we can control everything and then see what's wrong with the government and then do the right things that make it better for this average person out here. They sincerely believe that that's where we are because they've been told that by someone who says, I can deliver that for you, who, by the way, has never delivered that for 4 years where they were in control of the Republican Party. I think 2 of those years, they never did anything. So, why was this person? You have to ask, why was this person, the President of the United States at that time, Donald Trump, why was Donald so hell bent on controlling the legal system, controlling all the regulatory agencies, and supporting the big business? What was it about him that he felt he could control all of that in a way that he could then make it better for everybody else out there. Oh, and you've heard this so many times out of his mouth. Just go look at videos. I'm the only one who can do this for you. I'm the only one. It you hear that in cult leaders, and let me explain why I know that, because I was in a cult, a religious cult, for 15 years. And we were isolated from the rest of society and only wanted to believe that this one pastor had direct links to God, and only he could interpret things. And he was saying that, I'm writing this out because I'm studying hard in my office, and God is directing me to write these things out and put them to you. And it all made perfect sense. It really made a lot of sense. It was extremely logical. And he was such a charismatic communicator that it sounded right. And it was like, well, I don't know this stuff. So he says he has spent his lifetime studying this stuff. We should believe him. This is a moderate level, radical approach, complex problem. And the way he controlled that was saying the more you listen to people from the outside trying to tell you something else other than what I'm telling you, the more susceptible you are to go down the wrong path, and God will punish you for that. God doesn't want you to do that. There are only going to be a few of us that make it into heaven. The majority of the world out there won't. The scripture says this. But what he also didn't say was, scripture said, leave this in my hands. God says, leave this in my hands. It's very clear. It says that time after time after time. So why did we have to become politically involved in order to get it done? Some people say, well, God's directing us to do that. Why would he do that? He is omniscient. He's omnipotent. He's omnipresent. He is all powerful. What the hell is wrong with him that he can't handle this without us being involved? That was questions I was asking, and I wasn't getting any answers in this process. So it was a very complex situation. What I discovered is when I started, or actually some other people got me started, I don't want to take credit for that, because I was locked in. I had a master's degree. I was an intelligent person. I was an executive. I was making money. So anybody can be sucked into this if they have a need. And I had a spiritual need, and I didn't feel competent about my knowledge about spirituality. So I was resting in my faith in this other person. So I could see how MAGA people see Donald Trump, President of the United States, the biggest megaphone in the world. My God, why wouldn't you trust this guy? So, what came about with me is when somebody from the outside came in and said, all of those notes that you're studying, you're going to Bible classes 3 nights a week and twice on Sunday, and you're studying these notes that your pastor is giving you, and he's writing them out, even putting them in Hebrew and Arabic and Greek, depending on which book we were studying. Word for word, verse by verse. I'm telling you, you're getting the most knowledge. Nobody else is getting knowledge this way about the Bible. You are the, you can argue this. I'm telling you, you tell them these notes and they won't be able to argue against it. He was right. Most people don't spend that much time digging into the Bible. And maybe they should have. Maybe they should out there too. But what I finally found out was this pastor was telling me that He was doing the writing. He was divinely inspired by God to write these things. He was plagiarizing the many people who have studied and interpreted the Bible from for centuries. He was taking this from their books word for word and just changing a couple of phrases or a word or two, and particularly the words he didn't really understand the meaning of. And he wasn't educated in Greek. He wasn't educated in Arabic or Hebrew. He educated himself. He educated himself and some other. He was part of this. He was victimized by another individual doing the same thing to him, and and he was just literally plagiarizing, and we caught him, and we presented it, and then he threatened us. He threatened us, throw us out of the church. Well, we left the church anyway. But then it was like, you're going to hell. And he's telling everybody else in this church, we're going to hell. That don't talk to those people, don't associate with them. It's dangerous. That was the message to his flock. Not love them, not try to talk to them, not try to connect with them, not try to help them see the truth, which was not the truth, by the way. It was frankly plagiarism. He had to pull everything off the internet he pulled up because we were saying, hey, we're going to turn this over to the people who wrote these books, and you're putting your church in legal liability. They could charge you with plagiarism, and the church could end up paying a lot of money, and not alone, maybe you also. And he still didn't want to take it down. He finally did, but he's never kind of taken it all down. And there are still people who believe him today, friends of mine who still believe him today, still believe him today. And there may be those people from a complex situation. So I'm trying to tell you that is a personal, complex, difficult thing to do. And what you cannot do with people who are in that environment is be judgmental about them. You cannot call them ignorant or stupid, or you cannot say that they are less than human. Uh, you can't tag them as MAGA if you want to help them. If you want to communicate and connect and have any chance of helping someone in that kind of a situation, you have to be able to connect. You have to not judge, and you have to open up the lines of communication, and you have to have the interpersonal communication skill set to handle the dialogue in a way that they become desirable to respond, and as they respond they develop a self-discovery process that goes, maybe I have been thinking about that wrong. And that's how that transpired with us. You know, we began to ask ourselves a question. Then the more we began to investigate it, the more we found we needed to go deeper and deeper, faster. And finally, we left and we took ourselves out of that environment. And the freedom that's associated with that becomes so evident once you're out of it, because when you're in it, you're isolated from everyone else. That's how they control that environment. Now, from a complex situation that deals with leadership, it's not too much different. If you have, there's a program called um, the Five Power Bases uh, that has lasted for years and years. Yeah, I think it was developed 1956, 59, somewhere in that area, out of the University of Michigan. French and Raven were the original researchers in this, and they were wanting to know what employee employees who did well, what did they see in leaders versus employees who weren't doing well? What did they see in leaders? And they came up with the leaders having five bases of power. And I don't know if I quote these off to you, but one of them is expertness. In other words, leaders who were perceived as expert were viewed as, positive. Uh, they were competent, in other words. And then there was what they call referent leadership. Referent was approachable, likable, available. These were very interactive, highly interpersonally communicating individuals as leaders, and employees felt comfortable with that. They felt that that was part of what they needed. And then you had a couple of other power bases. One of them was legitimate. The fact that your title, you were assigned vice president or director, and as that title, you had certain authority over an individual. And that was a legitimate authority. I mean, you had the right to fire them, you had the right to hire them, you had a right to hold back certain percentages of increases or whatever, which was the other power. One of the other power bases was the reward power base, how people use reward structure. And these kind of interconnected. You begin to see the interconnection between those who were having a lot of success getting employees to engage and high performance and those who were not. Because the other one outside of legitimate and reward structures was coerciveness, or I can threaten you. I have the power. The ability for me to harm you is greater than you have as an employee to harm me. I can fire you. I can take away all your bonuses. I can give you a rotten schedule. I can make your life absolutely frigging miserable. Okay? So, which power bases were employees performing exceptionally well, maybe going beyond expectations? It was those employees who had leaders who were referent, approachable, likable, interactive, consistently communicating on a regular basis. And there became a sixth power in the 1980s called information. And leaders who were more transparent and open and flowing with communication versus those who try to control it fell into that referent or likable style. So, uh, so leaders who were approachable, likable, you could call it empathy today. They showed empathy. They communicated frequently. They were open. They were available, etc. Those leaders, and they also had a sense of expertise, not just expertise in the field that they were leading, like marketing, but leadership expertise. Okay. That combination of leadership expertise and their competence in the level that they were leading. Okay. Or the ability to allow people who were showing exceptional competence to rise through and be influential. That was another aspect of it. And so though that expertness and competence in that referent person often used the reward structure in a very positive way that was highly influential to other people. So that was the power base. The ones that weren't doing well was the guy who said, I'm the boss. You need to do what I say. And if you don't want to do what I say, I'm going to kick your ass out of this company. It's my way or the highway. You've heard those things. And we all know that those two differences, we all know it, but we don't always know how to do it. That is the big thing I discovered in the last 5 years. We don't know how to communicate effectively to get to that point of being that referent, perceived as competent person. And Warren Bennis and Bert Nanis put it together in a book called Leaders in a different way. in terms of how to connect and build trust, which was an extension, sort of an add on to what French and Raven did that made it even more uh, uh, understandable and more useful. And I will paraphrase a little bit of what they said in the book, but you can buy the book at Leaders. It's still on Amazon. Even now, today, I think you can still buy it. Maybe two or three editions from the one I read. But uh, they were saying that the things that were inherently important about trust was competence, which is exactly what French and Raven said. That was the expert. Another one was consistency. And consistency was important because employees could predict leaders. They didn't even necessarily need to be referent or likable, so to speak, but if they were consistent and they were fair, uh, and they had some sense of compassion about them. So we have competence and consistency and compassion. You, you know, I remember talking to one group of employees. I said, "This guy talks to you guys like you're awful. How can you put up with him?" They said, "We can right now are at a point where when something happens, we start taking action before he tells us because we know him so well. He's so consistent. We know him so well that we can start correcting the problem before he tells us. And so we don't have to deal with him. We don't have to hear that bad attitude because he'll come down and say, Here's what I want you to do. And we go, Well, it's already done. He goes, Oh, okay. And he goes back and starts doing his other stuff. So they didn't want to change this leader out. They didn't want to get rid of him because they had nailed him. They knew exactly what he wanted. So there's an example. But the other one is congruency, and congruency is you are and your behavior represents what you say and what you're discussing. That what you say is equitable and fair and consistent across the way, but you are what you say, and this is part of the part of communication that people don't often grab, and social media has impacted somewhat negatively. And that is the idea that um, we can't always sense because we're not trained to the nonverbal reactions that people have and connect them to their verbal language in such a way that it makes sense, that helps us better understand what you're meaning. And I did this so many times in so many meetings. I mean, people will tell you about interpersonal nonverbal communication, and that's part of the program I teach in that leadership course. Uh, is that they're saying a lot of research is saying most of the research is saying when a person hears what you say and they can also see you, uh, your actual nonverbal behaviors contribute 90% of what they believe you're meaning when you say that message. And I did this in team sessions for I don't know, probably 30 years, different team sessions. And I did this just to kind of as an icebreaker sometimes, but also to help me validate my mind that what the research was saying was right. I would stand in front of him and I'd say, take out a piece of paper and pencil. And in the first 10 seconds, you get 10 seconds to tell me to write down what you think I mean. Okay, I didn't want them to be able to change their answer. I said, you're going to have to show, you're going to have to hold this up in about 10 seconds after you tell me what you think I mean. Now, once you pay real close attention to me, look at me, and I would go, yes. I said, what do I mean? Write it down. They would write it down immediately. 85% on my own straw polls for years over thousands of employees. 85% of them would say no. And I would say, but I said yes. And they go, well, I don't know. We got the feeling you meant no. And that's because this nonverbal signal through the eyes connect with the brain more effectively than the voice. And there's science behind this. We know that there's lots of science. There's science from the physical science perspective point of view, and there's science from the neuroscience point of view in the brain that I cover when I go through this course to help you better understand why that happens, why we put so much faith in the nonverbal side. And there's so much more to nonverbal behavior than the facial features you're looking at here with me now. Okay. There's touch, there's proximity of distance between people, there's time, there's pitch, there's tone, there's verbiage, the actual verbal, the linguistics you use. All of that has some nonverbal components of the actual words you say. So when we're dealing with complex uh, situations, conflicts, or people who are adamant and defiant, and and these may be loved ones that you've been around and you care about desperately, but you just can't break through to them. I would say to you this: interpersonal communication is the method you will use to connect. If you do not understand it well, you can get by with stumbling through conflict or disagreement or downright cultural variances, uh, and they all play a role. You might even have some modem of being able to be influential with people. Maybe you're a charismatic speaker. Maybe you're not communicating quite as effectively as you could, but you're friendly, you're open, you're commit. Remember, those are things that people are attracted to. That's Donald Trump is good at this, by the way. He is excellent at that. He's excellent at telling you what you want to hear. He's lying about it, but he can make you believe it because you want to believe it. And he knows you want to believe it. Okay. So if you're listening to me and you happen to be someone that's wrapped up in the MAGA world and you're saying I'm full of shit, before you do that, you need to get online with me and talk to me because I came from your world and I don't anymore. Maybe, maybe I might have something to say, but you're going to you need to understand the complexity of what you're dealing with. If you're not competent at interpersonal communication and using interpersonal communication to effectively deal with complex, difficult discussions and situations, don't do them. Don't do them. Don't struggle in there thinking you can get by with it because you are the leader and you're supposed to be able to. Get some help. Get some help. I would venture to tell you right now, if you're in a family and you're trying to get a family member or a friend or someone you care about to recognize what's going on with Donald Trump and that whole group, who many of those people were so critical in the beginning and have now finally given up thinking, well, we can't change anybody, so we got to get over here to kind of protect their jobs. They're not over there because they believe Donald Trump. They're there because those people believe Donald Trump and they are going to go to the voting ballot box. That's the only reason they're falling in line. I mean, there were that's the only explanation you have. There are no other logical explanations anybody can present about why they say the things they say after having such a visceral reaction to the man. So that could be true about a leader in an organization too, by the way. It doesn't have to be just Donald Trump. Same concepts apply. That guy has a legitimate control over you. And if if you're living from paycheck to paycheck, you could be in the street on your rent. You can't you can't connect. You can't go to this person and feeling comfortable if you don't know how to do that effectively. Because if you make the mistake, you can be fired, and now you're in the street. You don't have employment. You don't have any food coming in. You don't have any extra money to tide you over for 3 or 4 months, and your rent's due, and you're just in stress. Okay. So there's so much about this that is important. And the, the program that's up there in the corner called Renaissance Leadership Odyssey is the model I am using to begin to try to connect with leaders and organizations, whether it's micro, macro, or those moderate organizations. And moderate would be the small businesses and medium sized businesses of the world in the business environment. The micro would be the just a mom and pop shop on Main Street with just the owner and 5 employees. The moderate would be they have 10 of those shops, they have 200 employees, and they have 3 or 4 managers. And then the macro is the Amazons and the Apples of the world. Uh, all of those people, regardless of those size, need to step back and take a look at how we connect as leaders. What is the role of leadership? It's not to control, getting other people to deliver what the organization wants. That's part of their role. It is not the primary role of leadership. The primary role of leadership is to build community. Build community within your organization, between other elements of the organization, and throughout the whole organization. Employees who sense that kind of organization, that's what they're looking for. There are fewer and fewer and fewer of them out there. Actually, they normally are pretty much available in small businesses who are just getting started. It's when they scale up and become bigger and bigger, they feel like they have to control as opposed to engage people into leadership. So, difficult communications, you need to go back and discover what we had there. You're going to have you have to kind of decide, am I in a micro situation, am I in a moderate situation, am I in a macro situation? And in that, are people kind of talking to each other and trying to come to some sort of balanced perspective that represents as many people as possible? Or do we have factions that are absolutely radically split and are not listening to or paying attention to anybody else? Because you will have to respond differently from an interpersonal communication perspective. You will have to respond differently, but the goal has to be to move people off those radical areas into a more balanced, central perspective. Because when you get down to it, when it comes down to what you're trying to do in leadership, you're trying to balance the harm. Think of it like a teeter totter. When two kids are on a teeter totter, they're balanced. They each have the ability to they feel equal. When one raises the other in the air, and they're in the air and they are excited and having fun, but then they go, well, now let me down. The other person on the ground goes, no, I'm not going to let you down. Well, before they lifted that one girl in the air, they were friends. They were having a good time. They trusted each other. They were laughing. Even if that girl lets that other girl down, the next time she takes her up, trust me, in the back of that little girl's mind is, I wonder if she's going to let me back down. That's the difference between harm, the ability of one person to do more harm than the other. And with a leadership role, you compact with the ability to do more harm to the employee than they have the ability to harm you. And your first objective is to eliminate that feeling from them, that they are as much valued to that organization's success as you are. And if you can't do that, and you have to use interpersonal communication, there's no other way for you to do this with somebody but to communicate with them. And it is interpersonal communication you have to be proficient at to do it. When you have to have that base. So, with the Renaissance Leadership Odyssey program, there are three pillars of education that must be mastered. One is interpersonal communication. You must master the skill of interpersonal communication. You think you have to have that ability because everything, if there's more than one person, everything begins and ends with that. The second thing we have to do, and this is what we have not done, this is what we have not done for 40 years. We have not taken the time to allow leaders to understand who they are from a psychological perspective, what I call a psychological leadership personality. Who am I? How do I think? Why am I always so pessimistic? Why can't I stop being pessimistic and be more reverent, more open, more compassionate, more empathetic? What is it that keeps me doing that? What is it about me? Where did that come from? What drove me in there? We spend no time developing that aspect of leaders and leadership development. We take them straight in and say, you got to be empathetic. Hell, I may never understood what empathy really is. It's hard for me to hear what you're telling me in those classes because I've never been that way about myself. Why? Now can I change that? Let's take a few months and let people understand who they are before we even think about them so they can make a choice as to whether, yeah, I think I would like to do that. You may get them in there and spend 6 months on them, and they're going, I don't think I really am. That's just not me. I don't want to do that. So I go back to sales. Instead of being a great salesperson and being promoted to sales manager and trying to lead all those other managers, which now is something I really don't want to do and I don't like to do. I love sales, but I don't like that. But that's the only way I can make more money. See, it'll begin to make you think about what roles you're requiring of people and and restructuring your organization in ways that'll optimize everybody's desire and capabilities about who they are. Then once you understand that, once you have that psychological leadership profile, that leadership personality, you understand who you're coming from. Then when you look at something like empathy or conflict management or interpersonal communication or time management or any other of a dozen of these great leadership skills that we have at our fingertips to teach, what happens is you know yourself. So you begin to assimilate that information. It flows into you, but you also begin to internalize it. You go, oh, yeah, I see how that fits me now. I see how I have to control how I think about this in order to make this work. And that's what's so good about Shurjad Samin's positive intelligence program. I mean, he discovered this, and now I'm not sure he's connected it the way I'm connecting it, and I'm not saying that I'm better than he is. I'm just saying where I'm looking at it a little differently. I'm looking at it from 40 years of practical experience of where we failed at this. He's pretty much saying this is what we need to do, and I think he's right. So yeah, I recommend you go in and go through this process for 6 months. 9 months before you decide you want to be a leader. Then, when you want to be a leader, you're assimilating the information, you're internalizing it. Then, the next thing you do is you're personalizing it to who you are. So, when you're learning empathy, you're going, yeah, I see. I see. This is how I see it from my perspective. So, when you go back into the organization after having Daniel Goleman's uh, emotional intelligence course, which is the other one I recommend. Uh, Now you've got who you are, you got Daniel's, here's how it needs to happen. You go out there and you apply it, but you apply it so your employee who has worked for you for maybe 5 or 6 years sees you applying something different, but it seems to be you. You seem to really be changing, as opposed to trying to come back and apply something, not knowing who you are, not understanding how it fits you. It comes across as incongruent, not congruent, which is one of those things you need trust, because what you're saying, your nonverbal cues are not reflecting it, and people are seeing that, and they're seeing that because there's some rationale, some science about why they're seeing that. Okay, that cycle of development, that sense of changing of roles, that sense of purpose of leadership in an organization is different than what we're doing now with folks. It's why we tend to isolate people a little more. We keep people in silos: marketing, HR, finance. Then when you go to budget time, it's a big ass fight. What would happen? I remember one time I don't know, I have most of my budgets in billion-dollar organizations were in the millions of dollars. I remember one time there was this, we were pretty well staffed up. We were doing good. I had a lot of money associated with finding people and staffing because they knew that was important. But marketing, there was something about marketing that I can't even remember what it was, but they needed an extra amount of money that they weren't budgeted for, and they were arguing for that, and it was kind of like, well, we've got this pretty well divvied up, and and I just popped out and said, take some of mine. And my God, I thought the whole world, it just fell silent in the room. What are you talking about? Well, I mean, it's obvious we're going to benefit from this happening. I think we can make it work with what we got. I got good people. I think it'll work. Well, I'm not going to detract from my people. Maybe we'll do less advertising and we'll figure out a way to deal with it. But but these guys, hell, they can build sales. That saves our company, prevents layoffs. Wow, really? It was like a shock, and it surprised me. It surprised me. And so when I dealt with senior teams, a lot of times I spent time in budgeting consulting. And we had courses on interpersonal communication and that sense of understanding and building a community between the whole organization when I was changing culture versus the other. It's always been part of who I was. It's always where my leadership roots and special forces and having a select team, elite team working real well together consistently. That's always been part of my roots. And it's one of the things I've always brought into organizations where I've tried to integrate it in. Not always as successful as I would have liked. I had my failures too, but most of the time I was able to do something along that line that helped an organization be better. I could not have done that unless I had an understanding of skills. Now, I told you I was going to show you a short video on uh, how the actual interpersonal communication systems works. And you'll see it's a little more complex. And this is really just between two people. So I'm trying to keep it as simple as possible. This is a conversation between two people that I'm explaining how this works as we work through it. It's about 4 minutes long. You can watch it or you can hang up and go home right now if you'd like. But let me see if this normally begins with a person, and that person has a message that they want to send to somebody else. So now we'll soon have two people involved. But first, before we go there, this person's creating a message. And when they do, they're creating it using their own personal goals and values and belief systems. They then want to send this message and the meaning of it, and they want that person to understand this message on the other side via two channels, usually verbal and nonverbal communication. In this case, you can see we've sort of minimized the communication channels because we've cut out the nonverbal because we're using a telephone. So it's hard to read a nonverbal signal when you can't see it. You can hear some tone inflections, etc., but you don't see a lot of what you do if we were doing this on a video conference where you could see my video, for example. You wouldn't have eye contact and you wouldn't be able to see any kind of gestures they have. So she's already cut out a large portion of the potential message meaning by cutting out the nonverbal communication. But in this case, she didn't have any choice. He lives in Saudi Arabia. You can't just fly over there and sit down across the table and have a 30-minute conversation. So in this case, she chose the telephone. So that's what's going on here. And you have cut out some of that communication. And then once he receives that message, what you'll see here is when he gets the message, he interprets it using his values and belief system. The way we have this model set up is part of another webinar I do, but it's focusing on the idea that this person is in Saudi Arabia, she's an American woman. There are a lot of barriers in the way besides not having nonverbal communication. There are his value systems and beliefs in women, her values systems and beliefs in women, a lot of potential for conflict that can cloud the meaning of that message. So if this is all we did, she really has no idea of whether or not he heard the message effectively and believed and understood the meaning as she intended it. So consequently, she has to pay attention. She has to be an active listener. And because when he responds, he's going to respond the same way. You have the same verbal communication coming back from him using the same network, the telephone. But again, you've cut out the nonverbal communication. Now, what we know about the nonverbal communication is when you do research and ask people what they associate with the meaning, 70% of that communication is normally associated with the nonverbal cues. So she's already minimized how effective she can be. So this verbal feedback is very important. Because it's from the verbal feedback that she's going to receive the cues as to whether or not he understands it. So it begins a cycle. What happens here, then she, having heard the feedback from him, creates another message to further clarify, depending on how much she believes he stood or understood or didn't understand. And she sends another signal, and this loop continues on as they develop the meaning together of that message, so it's very clear what they need to have happen. So this is the basic communication model that goes on every day with two people. And you can see there's a lot more complexity in this than most people are aware of. Okay, so there you can see there's a model. That's brief. That is bare bones explanation of the interpersonal communication model, and there is so much more wrapped up in each of those component pieces of that system. But most people don't even get that when they get taught about communication. And I will say this to wrap up. When it comes to dealing with difficult and complex communication issues, uh, you need to feel comfortable. You understand and become proficient at interpersonally communicating with other people. If you have any doubts, if you're queasy, if it's uncomfortable to you, get some help. Find somebody else who is proficient at that in your organization, or get a hold of me, get a hold of somebody else who you trust can can effectively communicate well and work through the process before you go in there and do it. You can save yourself a lot of time, a lot of headaches, and sometimes some outright bad consequences to trying to handle complex and difficult discussions without those being available uh, to you in terms of your knowledge base and your understanding of how to do that. Again, there are some books available. They are available on that. Uh, let's see. I think it's yeah. Buy me a coffee. If you go to that channel, you're going to find those books are sitting there. You can purchase those. I think the workbook is fairly expensive, $29.99 or something like. But that communication book is a really good outline. Discusses some of this stuff. It gives you a general idea of how to approach some things. There's a lot that you can do. I mean, down the road, there's a lot of places you can go and look at different things that will help you in a piecemeal format. I don't know of many people who have created an ongoing interpersonal communication leadership program focused on leadership like I just created and will be coming out in July. I haven't seen many of those. I might be missing somebody, but I haven't seen many of those out there. Um, and again, what's available in that course is stuff that I used every day to resolve some of these significant, both moderate and mostly macro issues out there uh, that are complex problems. These are tools I use, things that I know how to do and put together. Those are the kinds of things in that 2 hour every evening we're going to be discussing. A brief, real brief introduction to each of those segments, but we're covering persuasion, we're covering conflict management, we're covering difficult discussions, we're covering all kinds of those key things that I know leaders need to understand and learn so that they can become better at solving problems and improving the culture, the overall culture of the organization. So I hope this proves useful to you. Ask questions in the comment section. Apologize for short notices here, but this is the way this program has to work because of my particular scheduling dynamics. But feel free to put any kinds of questions you have in the comment sections. You can go to my YouTube community on the Building Renaissance Leaders YouTube channel. There's a community there. You can go in and make comments. You can ask to have different kinds of things presented in different podcasts coming up. You can ask to be on the podcast, and we can actually go through a scenario you have if you're willing to record it so other people can see what we discuss and maybe make use of that. You could put your successes and your failures, your frustrations and your loves, about how leaders are handling things. Just protect yourself. Don't put any names. Don't put any organizations. Just describe the situation without having to, talk about the industry or anything like that. And that will sometimes be helpful and gives me something I can come back in and respond to you on. It's asynchronous. It's not what I'd like to do. I'd like to be sitting across from you or have you on a call like this, so we can talk back and forth and really get into the nitty gritty, and because there's so many individual specific situations that people who put something in a comment and they want some advice, and I'm going, there's no way anybody can possibly respond to that effectively because there's not enough information. So hope this has been helpful. Hope everything that we did got printed and out to YouTube and out to Zoom in a way that you can grab it and read from it. I hope you can use it. Best of luck with the complex situations that we're dealing with today in our society, the very complicated communication things we need to do. I'm hoping this encourages you not to reject people who have a different viewpoint than yours, but to open yourselves up and have a dialogue with them. That's the only way they may see something differently. When we ridicule them, when we judge them, when we make fun of them, we just drive them further into those radical zones. You have a very good day.